Ladies and gentlemen, there are battles worth fighting, and there are battles designed to consume you, drag you down, and leave you exhausted, with nothing to show for it. Today, I speak to you about a particular kind of battle. One where your opponent is not merely misguided, mistaken, or misinformed, but is in the grip of something darker. It is a mistake to assume that every argument is a search for truth. Some are designed as traps, woven by forces that have no interest in reason, no care for evidence, and no love for the light. They seek only to distort, to twist, and to draw you into endless contention. When you engage with such people, those controlled by pride, malice, or deception, you are not having a debate. You are stepping into a quarrel that was lost before it even began. Do not imagine that demons always come with fire and horror. Sometimes they come with smooth words, self-righteous anger, and a relentless desire to see good men waste their time. They feed on frustration, delight in confusion, and rejoice when they see a soul entangled in pointless disputes. The moment you lower yourself to their game, they have already won. What then should a wise man do? First, recognize that truth does not need to be shouted to be true. It does not become stronger by wrangling with fools. A lion does not need to argue its case to be feared. Second, remember that silence is often more powerful than the best argument. When a storm rages, do you shout back at the wind? No, you take shelter and wait. So it is with madness. You do not wrestle it. You step aside and let it exhaust itself. Third, understand that persuasion is only possible when a person is willing to listen. A closed mind is not an audience, it is a wall. Speak truth where it may take root, but do not waste your words where the soil is barren. You are not called to change the unchangeable, you are called to shine light where it is welcomed. Lastly, trust in the power of example over argument. The greatest refutation of a fool is not debate, but a life lived in wisdom. Let them see what they refuse to hear, and let your peace be the evidence they cannot ignore. Do not be drawn into fruitless disputes with those who have no intention of seeking truth. Speak when your words may bear fruit, walk away when they will not, and trust that truth does not require your constant defense. It simply needs to be lived. An argument, at its best, is a noble pursuit of truth, a meeting of minds in which reason and evidence shape understanding. But not every argument is about truth. Some are elaborate distractions crafted not to enlighten but to entangle. Many who argue are not searching for answers, they are seeking to dominate, to unsettle, or to feed a hunger that has nothing to do with wisdom. Some arguments exist only to exhaust. They do not emerge from a genuine desire for clarity, but from a restless need for conflict. They are circular, never progressing toward resolution, always returning to the same tired provocations. A person caught in such an argument may feel compelled to prove something, to demonstrate patience, intelligence, or even righteousness. But the truth is not the goal. The goal is to keep the discussion alive, to drain energy and cloud judgment. Those who fall into this trap soon realize that no amount of explanation, no force of logic will satisfy the other side. The argument does not end because it was never meant to. Others argue not to understand but to assert power. Their interest is not in facts but in winning. They seek not to be corrected, nor to correct but to conquer. Their words are weapons, not tools of discovery. They may shift their positions, contradict themselves, or even dismiss evidence outright, not because they are confused but because consistency was never their aim. To them, conceding a point is a form of defeat, and they would rather persist in error than admit they were wrong. They argue for the thrill of battle, for the pleasure of seeing others struggle to make sense of nonsense. Then there are those whose arguments are driven by deeper unseen forces. Fear, pride, resentment. These are powerful masters, and those who serve them do not argue as free men but as captives. A man who argues out of fear does not seek truth, for truth might frighten him even more. A man driven by pride cannot afford to lose, for his identity is bound to his correctness. And a man who argues out of resentment does not want clarity, he wants to wound. Each of these motives distorts reason, making fair discussion impossible. What appears to be a debate about ideas is in fact a struggle against emotions too strong to be swayed by logic. There is also the matter of deception. Some arguments are not merely misguided but deliberately dishonest. Certain people argue in bad faith, not to engage but to manipulate. They know their position is weak, but they rely on misdirection, half-truths, and outright lies to keep the conversation off balance. They may appeal to emotions, distort history, or pretend ignorance when confronted with facts. Their goal is not to be right, but to create enough confusion that no one else is certain either. The longer they can muddy the waters, the more they win. And then there are arguments that are not arguments at all, but rituals. Some people argue as a form of performance, a way to affirm their belonging to a group or an ideology. They do not engage with ideas, they recite them. They do not seek answers, they reinforce beliefs. Their words are not open to challenge because, to them, debate is not about discovery, it is about loyalty. To question would be to betray. Such discussions are not dialogues but rehearsals, and anyone who participates expecting reason will only find repetition. Understanding that not every argument is about truth is essential for preserving wisdom and peace. One must learn to recognize when a conversation is leading toward greater understanding and when it is simply an endless loop. There is no duty to answer every challenge, no obligation to fight every battle. It is enough to know the truth without feeling compelled to prove it to those who are not truly seeking it. Demonic influence rarely announces itself with grand displays of horror. It does not always come with fire and shadow, nor does it appear with the obvious signs that human imagination so often conjures. Instead, it works in the quiet corners of thought, in the small compromises that seem harmless, in the shifts of perception that go unnoticed until they have already taken root. It does not need to rage when it can whisper. It does not need to strike when it can suggest. Subtlety is its strength, for what is unseen is rarely resisted, and what is unrecognized is never fought against. One of the ways this influence takes hold is through distortion. It does not seek to destroy truth outright, but to twist it just enough that it becomes difficult to see clearly. A good intention is nudged towards self-righteousness. A desire for justice is tainted with bitterness. A call for love is warped into permissiveness for evil. Few would embrace deception if it appeared in its purest form, but when it is mingled with what is good, it becomes far more effective. The most dangerous lies are not the ones that stand boldly against truth, but the ones that wear its colors while marching in the opposite direction. Another sign of this influence is division. Not all conflict is the work of darkness, but when discord seems to spread without cause, when it festers over small matters, when relationships break over things that should have been resolved with grace, something unseen may be at work. People find themselves quarreling without understanding why, turning against friends they once trusted, holding grudges that seem larger than reason would justify. These fractures are often encouraged by whispers of suspicion, by the quiet reinforcement of pride, by the subtle suggestion that forgiveness is weakness and reconciliation is surrender. Confusion is another favored tool. When right and wrong become unclear, when certainty is eroded by endless questioning, when clarity is replaced by constant doubt, then progress toward truth is halted. Those under this influence often find themselves lost in endless debates, unable to settle on what is true, swaying from one perspective to another without firm conviction. Their minds are not changed by reason, but are instead kept in a state of restless uncertainty. In this way, demonic influence does not need to convince, it only needs to make conviction impossible. Then there is the slow erosion of moral courage. Few people wake up one day and choose to abandon their values. More often they give them away, piece by piece, in moments that seem insignificant at the time. A small compromise here, a neglected duty there, a refusal to speak when words were needed, a willingness to turn away when action was required. Over time, these small choices accumulate until a person finds themselves in a place they never intended to be. The change did not happen suddenly, it was gradual, so gentle that they never felt the shift. Perhaps the most insidious effect of this influence is the way it encourages self-deception. It whispers that all is well, that there is no danger, that one's own heart is beyond question. It fosters the idea that darkness is always somewhere else, in someone else, never within. It blinds people to their own faults while magnifying the failures of others. It assures them that their anger is justified, that their selfishness is wisdom, that their lack of mercy is discernment. And in doing so, it keeps them from ever seeing the chains they have willingly placed upon themselves. Demonic influence is rarely loud, rarely obvious, and rarely forceful. It does not need to be, because the most effective control is the kind that is never recognized. It is the quiet shaping of thoughts, the subtle redirection of desires, the unnoticed shift of priorities. It moves in whispers, in slow changes, in the things left unchecked until they have already done their work. And by the time its presence is recognized, it has often already taken hold. Truth stands on its own, unshaken by denial and unaffected by argument. It does not diminish when ignored, nor does it vanish when opposed. It remains what it is, whether it is acknowledged or not, yet many feel compelled to defend it at every turn, as if truth were a fragile thing that might crumble under attack. This impulse, though often noble, can become a trap. There is a time to speak, but there is also a time to remain silent, for not every battle serves the cause of truth. The desire to defend truth in every situation often comes from a misunderstanding of how it operates. Truth does not depend on the skill of its defenders, nor is it strengthened by debate. It exists apart from opinion, standing firm whether it is praised or ridiculed. Arguing with those who have no intention of listening does not protect truth. It only drains the one who seeks to uphold it. Some arguments are not battles over reality, but distractions from it. When a man is determined to reject what is evident, no amount of reasoning will change his heart. To engage with him is not to defend truth, but to waste time in a struggle that leads nowhere. There are those who do not seek truth, but only conflict. They are not interested in understanding, but in winning, and for them debate is a weapon rather than a path to clarity. Their goal is not to discover what is right, but to exhaust their opponent, to keep them occupied in endless dispute. When truth is drawn into such conflicts, it is not honored, it is cheapened, made into a game rather than a reality. Those who fight every battle may believe they are serving truth, but in reality they are allowing themselves to be led into fruitless quarrels that benefit no one. Silence is often more powerful than argument. A wise man does not feel the need to answer every foolish challenge, nor does he throw pearls before those who have no desire to receive them. There are moments when words will not illuminate but only add to the noise. In such times, restraint is not weakness but wisdom. Truth is not like a fragile flame that must be shielded from every gust of wind. It is like a mountain, unmoved by storms. It does not become less true because it is unspoken, nor does it become more true because it is shouted. There is also the matter of persuasion. People rarely change their minds through argument alone. More often they are convinced by the quiet weight of reality, by the undeniable force of what is. A man may reject truth in words, but he cannot escape it in life. Reality will prove itself over time, whether or not he acknowledges it. In many cases, the best defense of truth is not to argue for it, but to live it, to let its strength be seen rather than merely spoken. When truth is embodied in action, it carries a force far greater than words alone ever could. To refuse to fight every battle is not to abandon truth, but to trust it. It does not need constant defense, nor does it require endless dispute. It is not a thing so delicate that it must be upheld at all times by human effort. It endures whether spoken or silent, and those who know its power are not anxious to prove it at every opportunity. They understand that there are battles worth fighting and battles best left alone. And in knowing this, they guard their strength for the moments that truly matter. Silence carries a strength that shouting can never achieve. In a world that rewards noise, where attention is often won by the loudest voice, it is easy to believe that volume equals power. But true authority is not found in how much one says, or how forcefully one speaks. It is found in the weight of what is left unspoken. A whisper can command more respect than a yell, and an absence of words can hold more meaning than an endless flood of them. Those who understand this know that silence is not emptiness but control. It is the refusal to be drawn into foolish disputes, the discipline to let words serve a purpose rather than a passion, and the wisdom to know that some truths are better revealed through action than through speech. Shouting rarely convinces. When tempers rise and voices grow loud, the argument ceases to be about truth and becomes about dominance. A person who shouts is not trying to explain, they are trying to overpower. The louder one speaks, the more the other resists, not necessarily because they disagree, but because they are being attacked. A shouted truth can feel like an assault, and the natural response to an attack is defense, not reflection. Even when one is right, Shouting can push the listener further away, turning a moment of potential understanding into a contest of wills. Silence, on the other hand, disarms. It is unexpected. When faced with anger, most anticipate anger in return. When met with accusations, they expect a defense. But silence shifts the dynamic. It leaves space, forcing the other person to hear their own words, to sit with their own thoughts, without opposition to push against. A moment of quiet can plant a seed of doubt, causing a person to reconsider where they might have otherwise resisted. It allows truth to work on its own, without interference, without pressure. It gives time for clarity to emerge from chaos. Not all words are necessary. Many arguments could have been avoided, if only one side had chosen to remain silent. Much foolishness is fueled not by its own strength, but by the reaction it provokes. There are people who thrive on conflict, who are not searching for wisdom but for an excuse to quarrel. Engaging with them does not illuminate, it only feeds their need for contention. In such cases, silence is not submission but refusal to play a game that has no winner. It is the withdrawal of fuel from a fire that would otherwise burn without end. There is also a dignity in silence that shouting can never possess. Restraint shows confidence, a certainty that does not require constant reinforcement. The most respected leaders, the most admired figures, are rarely those who speak the most, but those who choose their words carefully. Their silence is not an absence of thought, but a sign of depth. They do not waste speech on the unworthy or the unwise. They know that a single well-placed word spoken at the right time carries more power than 1,000 spoken in haste. Silence also allows for observation. One who speaks constantly is often too busy thinking of their next words to truly listen. But one who remains quiet can see what others miss. They notice the contradictions in an opponent's argument, the insecurities hidden beneath anger, the moments when a simple pause could shift the course of a conversation. They understand that listening is often more revealing than speaking, that people expose more of themselves in the spaces between words than in the words themselves. In many situations, silence is not merely a tactic, but a statement. It declares that one is above the petty struggles of the moment, that their time and energy are too valuable to be wasted on fruitless disputes. It shows that wisdom is not measured by how much one says, but by how well one chooses when to speak and when to hold their peace. Persuasion is often mistaken for force, as if the right combination of words or the most compelling argument could break through any resistance. But no matter how clear the reasoning, how undeniable the evidence, or how eloquent the speaker, persuasion only works where there is willingness. A mind that has already decided against change will not be moved, not because the truth is insufficient, but because acceptance requires something deeper than logic alone. It requires an openness that cannot be imposed from the outside. A person who does not wish to be persuaded will always find a way to reject what is presented to them. They will question motives, dismiss evidence, or reinterpret facts to fit what they have already chosen to believe. If they fear being wrong, they will protect their beliefs with excuses rather than examine them honestly. If they take pride in their position, they will resist change not because of reason, but because admitting fault would feel like a loss. If they are driven by emotion, no amount of rational argument will sway them, for their foundation is not built on reason to begin with. The will to believe must come from within. It cannot be forced upon someone who does not want it. There is a difference between a discussion and a struggle. In a discussion, both sides seek to understand. There is an exchange, a willingness to consider, a shared pursuit of clarity. But when persuasion is met with stubbornness, the conversation ceases to be a pursuit of truth and becomes a contest of endurance. One side tries to push truth forward, the other digs in deeper. The harder one presses, the more resistance they meet. The more arguments are presented, the more they are deflected. The battle is not against ignorance, but against a refusal to see, and in such a battle, logic is powerless. Some people are unwilling to be persuaded because their identity is tied to their beliefs. To change their mind would not simply mean accepting a new idea. It would mean reshaping who they are. If a man has built his reputation on a particular view, he may see its abandonment as a kind of death. If a person has spent years defending a position, admitting error may feel unbearable. When persuasion threatens a person's sense of self, no argument will be enough, because the resistance is not intellectual, it is personal. The timing of persuasion also matters. Some truths are rejected in one season of life but embraced in another. A lesson that falls on deaf ears today may take root years later, not because the words have changed, but because the heart has. People are rarely persuaded in the heat of a debate, but often in quiet moments of reflection, when defenses are down and truth can work without pressure. The right words spoken at the wrong time will not be heard, but a seed planted in the right moment may grow long after the conversation has ended. There is wisdom in knowing when to speak and when to step back. A closed door does not need to be battered down. A person who does not want to hear will not listen, and chasing them with truth only makes them flee faster. Persuasion is an invitation, not a demand. It is offered, not imposed. If there is no willingness, no openness, then no amount of argument will matter. The best thing to do is let truth remain where it is, unforced, untainted by struggle, and allow time, experience, and the quiet work of reality to do what words cannot. Truth is not strengthened by argument alone. It does not gain power through debate, nor does it require constant defense. It stands firm regardless of who accepts it, and it does not diminish when rejected. Yet many spend their energy in endless disputes, believing that if they can only craft the perfect argument, they will force others to see what is true. But truth is not merely something to be spoken, it is something to be lived. A life shaped by truth carries more weight than words ever could. A person who embodies truth in their actions persuades more deeply than one who only argues for it. There is a difference between proving truth and demonstrating it. To argue for truth is to present it as a theory, as an idea to be debated, but to live the truth is to make it undeniable. When someone sees truth lived out, when they witness integrity, consistency, and wisdom in action, they encounter something that cannot be dismissed with clever words. A person may resist an argument, but they cannot argue with a life that reflects something real and unshakable. They may reject what is said, but they will take notice of what is done. Arguments often create resistance. When truth is presented as a challenge to be won, it provokes defensiveness rather than understanding. People do not like to be told they are wrong, and when they feel attacked, they become more determined to hold their ground. But when truth is lived out with humility and strength, it bypasses this resistance. It does not demand agreement. It simply exists, consistent and unwavering. Over time, those who witness it must wrestle with the reality of what they see. They may refuse to acknowledge it at first, but truth has a way of lingering, quietly working in the background long after the argument has ended. Living the truth also protects against hypocrisy. It is easy to speak about truth while failing to live up to it. Many who argue most fiercely for what is right fail to apply it in their own lives. They expose falsehoods in others while ignoring the contradictions in themselves. This weakens the very truth they claim to defend. People are not convinced by words alone. They are convinced when they see integrity, when they see someone who does not merely speak about truth, but submits to it. A person whose actions do not align with their words will never be truly persuasive, for even the most eloquent argument cannot cover the evidence of a life that contradicts itself. Living the truth requires patience. It does not always bring immediate results. People may resist, mock, or misunderstand. They may dismiss what they do not want to accept. But truth, when lived out, has a quiet persistence. It does not fade when ignored, nor does it lose its power when unrecognized. Over time, it proves itself in ways that arguments cannot. Circumstances change, perspectives shift, and what once seemed easy to reject becomes impossible to ignore. Many who have resisted truth for years have found themselves drawn to it, not by forceful debate, but by the quiet, steady witness of a life lived in accordance with it. To live the truth is to trust it. It is to understand that truth does not need to be shouted in every moment, nor does it require constant defense. It speaks for itself when it is embodied. Those who live it know that real persuasion does not come from endless words, but from unwavering consistency. The most effective way to make truth known is not to argue for it at every opportunity, but to live in such a way that it becomes visible, undeniable, and ultimately irresistible.